My hands trembled as I stared at the text message on my phone. 3 simple words from my husband, David, that made my blood run cold. I know everything. Come home now. I was sitting in my car outside Marcus' apartment, still tasting his kiss on my lips from just minutes before. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. After 4 months of sneaking around with my coworker, I thought David was still clueless, buried in his endless work projects. I expected screaming accusations, maybe even divorce papers thrown in my face. But what my husband did next was something I never saw coming. Before I dive into that terrible day, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because I promise you what David did will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you will want to stick around for this one. 8 years ago, I thought I had found my fairy tale when I married David Chen at Oregon State University. Wait, let me correct that. David Williams. He was this brilliant software engineer with kind eyes and a gentle smile that made my knees weak every time he looked at me. I was finishing my architecture degree, dreaming of designing beautiful homes where families could build their lives together. David seemed like the perfect partner to build that dream with. Those early years felt magical. David had this way of remembering every little detail about me. He knew I loved yellow tulips, not roses. He remembered that I took my coffee with oat milk and a dash of cinnamon. When I had a rough day at Foster & Associates, the architecture firm where I worked, David would surprise me with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. We bought our first house in Portland, a charming craftsman with a wrap-around porch that I spent weeks designing renovations for. We traveled to Europe for our honeymoon, spent lazy Sunday mornings reading the newspaper in bed, and talked about having kids someday. David was successful too. His software engineering skills landed him positions at several tech companies, and his income allowed us to live comfortably. I felt proud walking into events with him, introducing him as my husband to my colleagues. He was smart, stable, and seemed completely devoted to me. Friends would tell me how lucky I was to have found such a good man. But success has a way of becoming addictive. 3 years ago, David joined a startup that promised to revolutionize cloud computing. Suddenly, my attentive husband disappeared. He started working 12 to 14-hour days, coming home after I had already eaten dinner alone and gone to bed. Weekends became work days too. When I tried to talk to him about anything beyond his latest project, he would nod absently while typing on his laptop. Our conversations became one-sided affairs where I would share stories about my day while he responded with distracted grunts. The man who used to hang on my every word now seemed to find everything I said boring or unimportant. Date nights disappeared completely. When I suggested we take a weekend trip to the coast, David would promise we would go after this next deadline. That deadline never seemed to come. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. David would arrive after 11 at night, grab leftovers from the fridge, and disappear into his home office until past midnight. Some mornings, I would wake up to find he had already left for work before dawn. We were living completely separate lives under the same roof. The loneliness crept in slowly at first, then hit me like a tidal wave. I found myself looking forward to work just to have adult conversations with people who actually listened when I spoke. My colleagues at Foster & Associates became my primary source of social interaction. That is when Marcus Thompson joined our team. Marcus was hired as a landscape architect to head up our new sustainable design division. He was 35 years old, recently divorced, with an 8-year-old daughter named Emma, who lived with him every other week. Unlike David, Marcus had this warm energy that filled up a room. He was tall with sandy brown hair and laugh lines around his green eyes that showed he actually used them regularly. From his first day, Marcus made an effort to connect with everyone on our team. He brought coffee for the whole office on Tuesday mornings and remembered everyone's orders by the end of his first week. When we worked on the Lake Tahoe resort project together, I discovered that Marcus actually listened when I explained my design concepts. He asked thoughtful questions and built on my ideas instead of dismissing them. Our lunch breaks started extending from 30 minutes to 2 hours as we discussed everything from architecture to books to travel. Marcus had traveled extensively during his marriage and had fascinating stories about visiting ancient buildings in Rome and Barcelona. He understood my passion for creating spaces where people could truly live, not just exist. With Marcus, I felt heard and appreciated in a way I'd forgotten was possible. What started as an innocent friendship began shifting into something deeper during those late nights working on the Lake Tahoe project. The resort design required extensive collaboration between architecture and landscaping, which meant Marcus and I spent countless hours together refining blueprints and discussing plant selections. One evening in early March, we were the only ones left in the office trying to finalize the guest cottage layouts before our morning presentation. Marcus ordered pizza and opened a bottle of wine he kept in his desk for special occasions. As we spread the drawings across the conference room table, our shoulders kept brushing as we leaned over the plans. For the first time in months, I found myself talking openly about my marriage. I told Marcus how David had become a workaholic who barely acknowledged my presence anymore. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed he was really paying attention. He shared his own story about how his marriage had ended when his ex-wife became so focused on her medical residency that they became like roommates instead of partners. When it was time to leave, Marcus walked me to my car in the empty parking garage. As we reached my silver Honda, he turned to face me and said, "Naomi, I hope you know how incredible you are. David is an idiot if he cannot see that." Before I could respond, Marcus pulled me into what was supposed to be a friendly goodbye hug, but neither of us let go. Standing there in his arms, I felt something I had not experienced in years. I felt desired. I felt valued. I felt alive. When we finally separated, there was an electricity between us that we both pretended not to notice. Over the next few weeks, our text exchanges became more personal. Instead of, "Good morning, ready for another day of revisions," Marcus started sending messages like, "Good morning, beautiful, hope you slept well." When he handed me documents, his fingers would linger on mine just a moment longer than necessary. I started spending extra time getting ready for work, choosing outfits that I knew he would compliment. David remained completely oblivious to the changes in my behavior. I could have shaved my head and dyed it purple, and I doubt he would have noticed as long as his laptop was open. His indifference made it easier to justify the feelings I was developing for Marcus. I told myself I deserved to feel appreciated by someone. The first time Marcus and I crossed the line was on a Friday evening in May. He had invited me for drinks after work at a small wine bar downtown. We sat in a dim corner booth, and after 2 glasses of Pinot Noir, Marcus took my hand and said, "Naomi, I think I am falling for you. I know this is complicated, but I cannot pretend I do not have feelings anymore." My heart raced as I looked into his eyes. I knew this was a crossroads moment. I could pull my hand away, make an excuse, and try to salvage my marriage by working harder to reconnect with David. Or I could acknowledge that I had feelings for Marcus too, and see where this led. "I have feelings for you too," I whispered, barely believing I was saying the words out loud. Marcus squeezed my hand and leaned across the table to kiss me softly. It was gentle and tentative, but it sent electricity through my entire body. I had not felt passion like that in years. That kiss in the wine bar led to more secret meetings. We started meeting at a small apartment Marcus rented across town, telling ourselves it was just physical attraction that would burn itself out. But our connection went much deeper than that. Marcus was fascinated by my dreams of designing sustainable communities. He encouraged me to enter a design competition I'd been hesitant about. He celebrated my small victories at work and listened patiently when I vented about difficult clients. For 4 months, I lived a double life. 3 days a week, I would tell David I was working late or meeting my sister Sarah for dinner. Instead, I would drive to Marcus' apartment, where we would cook dinner together, talk for hours, and make love with a passion I'd forgotten existed. Marcus made me feel beautiful and intelligent and worthy of attention. I started fantasizing about leaving David and building a real relationship with Marcus. He talked about introducing me to his daughter Emma and taking trips together once my situation was resolved. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about my future. I convinced myself that David would barely notice if I left since he was so absorbed in his work anyway. The guilt was constant, but it was overshadowed by how alive I felt when I was with Marcus. I had become a master of deception, deleting text messages and creating fake calendar entries to cover my tracks. David never questioned my explanations or seemed suspicious about my frequent absences. His lack of attention to our relationship made the affair feel almost justified. On the Friday that changed everything, Marcus and I were at his apartment celebrating the completion of the Lake Tahoe project. The resort had approved our design, and it felt like a huge professional victory we had achieved together. We opened a bottle of champagne and were cuddled on his couch, planning a weekend getaway to celebrate when my phone started ringing. David's name appeared on the screen. He never called during work hours unless there was a genuine emergency, so I immediately felt panic rising in my chest. I looked at Marcus and whispered, "I should not answer this." But the phone kept ringing. David called 15 times in a row, each missed call making my anxiety spike higher. Finally, a text message appeared that made my blood turn to ice. "Emergency at work, need you home right now." I scrambled to get dressed while Marcus tried to calm me down. "Maybe it really is just a work emergency," he suggested, but we both knew something felt wrong. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, running through possible explanations for David's urgent calls. When I walked into our living room, David was sitting calmly on the couch with his laptop open. There was no sign of any emergency. His hair was perfectly combed, his shirt unwrinkled. He looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before, completely neutral and eerily calm. "Hi, honey," he said in a voice that sounded normal but somehow felt dangerous. "Thanks for coming home so quickly. Please sit down. We need to talk." My legs felt weak as I sat in the armchair across from him. David closed his laptop and set it aside, giving me his full attention for the first time in months. The silence stretched between us until I could not stand it anymore. "What is the emergency?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay at your office?" David smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Oh, there is no emergency at my work, but there definitely is an emergency in our marriage." He reopened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. "I think you should see this." The video that began playing made my stomach drop to the floor. It was security camera footage from our office building's parking garage, showing Marcus and me in a passionate embrace next to my car just 2 days earlier. The timestamp showed it was from Wednesday evening when I had told David I was working late on final project revisions. I watched myself on screen, running my hands through Marcus' hair as he pressed me against my car door. The video was crystal clear, leaving no room for denial or explanation. When it ended, David closed the laptop again and looked at me expectantly. "So," he said conversationally, "how long has this been going on?" I expected him to scream. I expected accusations and threats of divorce. Instead, his calm demeanor was far more terrifying than anger would have been. I found myself confessing everything, telling him it had been going on for 4 months, that I felt lonely and neglected, that Marcus made me feel valued in ways David had not for years. David listened to my entire confession without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "I see. You felt lonely. I have been a bad husband." His response left me speechless. Where was the outrage? Where were the demands that I never see Marcus again? Instead, David began outlining a plan to save our marriage. He suggested we start having weekly date nights. He wanted to book a vacation to Napa Valley for the following month. He even mentioned couples therapy. "I do not want to lose you, Naomi," he said with what seemed like genuine emotion. "This affair is partly my fault. I neglected you and our relationship. But I love you, and I am willing to fight for us." I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. My husband was offering forgiveness and a chance to rebuild what we had lost. It seemed too good to be true, but I convinced myself that David truly understood how his neglect had contributed to my infidelity. I agreed to end things with Marcus immediately and focus on repairing our marriage. Over the next 2 weeks, David transformed into the husband I had fallen in love with 8 years earlier. He came home by 6 every evening with flowers or wine. He cooked elaborate dinners and asked about my day with genuine interest. He booked us a luxury suite at Auberge du Soleil in Napa and planned romantic activities for every day of our long weekend getaway. But something felt off about David's sudden transformation. His attention felt performative, like he was playing a role rather than genuinely reconnecting with me. He asked surprisingly detailed questions about Marcus that seemed to go beyond mere curiosity. He wanted to know where Marcus lived, whether he had family in the area, details about his custody arrangement with his daughter. I started noticing other strange behaviors too. David was more secretive with his phone than I had ever been during my affair. He would step outside to take calls and always positioned his screen away from me when typing. When I asked about these mysterious conversations, he claimed they were work-related, but his startup had never required such secrecy before. The most unsettling moment came when David mentioned that he knew Marcus' daughter Emma attended Riverside Elementary School. I had never told David that detail, and I could not remember Marcus mentioning it in my presence either. When I asked how he knew that information, David brushed it off as something I must have mentioned in passing. The truth about David's real intentions began unraveling when Marcus called me in a panic 3 weeks after my confession. His voice was shaking as he told me that someone had contacted the Human Resources Department at Foster & Associates, providing detailed documentation of our workplace affair. The company was launching an investigation that could result in both of us being terminated. But that is not the worst part. Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone also contacted my ex-wife Jennifer and sent her photos of us together. She is threatening to file for emergency custody of Emma, claiming I am an unfit parent who engages in inappropriate workplace relationships. My hands went numb as I listened to Marcus describe how his entire life was crumbling around him. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Just as David was showering me with affection and promises of reconciliation, Marcus was being systematically destroyed. That evening, I confronted David directly. I found him in his home office typing intensely on his laptop with multiple browser tabs open. When he saw me in the doorway, he quickly minimized his windows, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like a private investigator's report. "David, we need to talk," I said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. "Marcus is being investigated at work. Someone sent information about our affair to HR and to his ex-wife. You would not happen to know anything about that, would you?" David leaned back in his chair and smiled that same cold smile I had seen the day he showed me the security footage. "Why would you assume I had anything to do with that? Maybe someone else at your office noticed inappropriate behavior." "Because the timing is too perfect," I replied, my voice gaining strength. "You find out about the affair and suddenly Marcus' entire life falls apart while you play the perfect forgiving husband. This is not forgiveness, David. This is revenge." For a moment, David's mask slipped completely. His eyes turned hard as steel, and his voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You think you can humiliate me with some divorced loser and just walk away? You think I would let that slide without consequences?" "So you admit it," I said, feeling sick to my stomach. "You have been planning this whole thing, the romantic dinners, the vacation, planning the therapy suggestions. It was all an act while you destroyed Marcus behind the scenes." David stood up from his desk and walked toward me slowly. "Marcus Thompson made the mistake of touching what belongs to me. Did you really think I would just let that go? I have been building a case against him for months, Naomi. I know everything about his pathetic little life. I know where he banks, where his daughter goes to school, what kind of car he drives. I could ruin him completely if I wanted to." The man standing in front of me was someone I had never seen before. This was not the gentle engineer I had married. This was someone capable of calculated cruelty that terrified me. I realized that David's forgiveness had never been real. He had been playing a long game, making me think our marriage could be saved while systematically destroying the man I had fallen for. "What do you want from me?" I asked, backing toward the door. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," David replied coldly. "You chose to betray our marriage, and now Marcus is paying the price. But do not worry, darling. As long as you stay here with me and play the role of the devoted wife, I will stop making his life miserable. This can all go away if you just forget about him and focus on being the wife you promised to be 8 years ago." I realized I was trapped in a marriage with someone who saw love as ownership and betrayal as grounds for psychological warfare. David was not trying to win me back. He was trying to control me through fear and manipulation. The man I had married was gone, replaced by someone who would destroy innocent people to maintain his sense of power. That night, I lay awake next to David, listening to him sleep peacefully as if he had not just revealed himself to be capable of calculated revenge. I knew I could not stay in this marriage not just for my own safety, but to protect Marcus from further destruction. David had shown me who he really was, and I finally understood that my affair had not created this monster. It had simply revealed what had always been lurking beneath his perfect husband facade. The next morning, while David was at his startup office, I drove to Marcus' apartment to warn him about what I had discovered. When he opened the door, I barely recognized the confident man I had fallen for 4 months earlier. Marcus looked exhausted and defeated, like he had not slept in days. "Naomi, you should not be here," he said, looking nervously past me into the hallway. "If someone sees us together, it will just make things worse." I pushed past him into the apartment and told him everything David had confessed the night before. Marcus listened with growing horror as I described my husband's calculated plan for revenge. When I finished, Marcus sank onto his couch and put his head in his hands. "I already lost my job," he said quietly. "Foster and Associates terminated me yesterday for violating workplace conduct policies. Jennifer filed for emergency custody this morning, and her lawyer says I might lose Emma completely. Your husband is not just ruining my career, Naomi. He's destroying my relationship with my daughter." Seeing Marcus broken like that filled me with a rage I had never experienced before. David had not just betrayed our marriage vows. He had used his technical skills and financial resources to wage war against an innocent man whose only crime was making me feel valued. This was not justice, or even reasonable revenge. This was pure cruelty. I made a decision that would change the trajectory of all our lives. Instead of begging David to stop or trying to appease him into leaving Marcus alone, I chose to fight back. I contacted Jennifer Walsh, the best divorce attorney in Portland, and made an emergency appointment for that afternoon. Jennifer listened carefully as I described David's harassment campaign against Marcus and his psychological manipulation of me. She explained that while David's actions might not be illegal, they painted a picture of someone who was vindictive and potentially dangerous. She advised me to document everything and begin building a case for divorce based on irreconcilable differences and emotional abuse. Over the next week, I secretly recorded conversations with David where he bragged about his plan to ruin Marcus completely. I gathered evidence of his harassment, including copies of the reports he had sent to Foster and Associates and screenshots of messages he had sent to Jennifer Thompson. I also reached out to my sister Sarah, who agreed to let me stay with her once I was ready to leave David. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal while I prepared my escape. David continued his charade of being the perfect forgiving husband, booking our Napa Valley vacation and talking about our future together. But now I could see the calculation behind every gesture, the way he monitored my responses to gauge whether his manipulation was working. When I finally served David with divorce papers 2 weeks later, his reaction confirmed everything I had learned about his true character. Instead of sadness or even anger about our marriage ending, his first concern was maintaining control over the narrative. He immediately threatened to destroy Marcus even more thoroughly if I proceeded with the divorce. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he snarled, his mask slipping completely. "I will make sure Marcus never works in architecture again. I will make sure his daughter grows up thinking her father is a pathetic failure who breaks up families. You have no idea what I am capable of." But David had underestimated me. I had documented his threats and harassment thoroughly. When his employer learned that he had been using company resources to conduct personal investigations and harassment campaigns, they terminated him immediately. The private investigator he had hired was willing to testify about the scope of David's surveillance activities, which helped Marcus build a case for workplace discrimination. 6 months after I moved out of our Portland house, my divorce was finalized. David fought me on every detail, trying to use financial pressure to force me back into the marriage. But with Jennifer Walsh's help, I secured a fair settlement that allowed me to rebuild my life independently. The most satisfying moment came when Marcus got his job back at Foster and Associates. The company realized they had acted hastily in terminating him and offered him a promotion to head their new sustainable development division. His custody battle with Jennifer also resolved in his favor once the court understood that David's harassment had been the source of the allegations against Marcus. Today, I'm living in a small but beautiful apartment downtown, working as a freelance architect while I build my own sustainable design consultancy. Marcus and I maintained our friendship, but we both needed time to heal from the trauma David had inflicted on our lives. We learned that relationships built on pain and secrecy, even when that pain was not our fault, need space to transform into something healthy. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who appear most stable and reliable are actually the most dangerous when their control is threatened. David's revenge showed me that I had been married to someone who valued possession over partnership, who saw my independence as betrayal rather than growth. Most importantly, I learned that I would rather be alone and authentic than partnered and controlled. The affair with Marcus was not right, but it opened my eyes to how emotionally dead my marriage had become. David's calculated response taught me that true love should never involve surveillance, manipulation, or revenge. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to our greatest truths. David's revenge taught me that I would rather be alone than with someone who saw love as ownership. The affair was not right, but it opened my eyes to a marriage that was already broken. Today, I am building a life based on honesty, starting with being honest with myself. Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt more like a possession than a partner? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about love, betrayal, and finding the strength to start over. Do not forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better than a relationship built on control and fear. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most painful experiences lead us to the most authentic versions of ourselves.